honor those whose love is defined by protection. And it feels impossible to stand here on a day devoted to mothers to not talk about the children of this world. The ones they carried, the ones they raised, the ones they lost, and the ones they're still trying to protect. I want to be honest from the start, as much as I love my mom, and I do, hi mom, shout out Sylvie Robinson, but this is not a soft Mother's Day reflection. But then again, one of you know me to be soft. And that was one of two parts in 15 minutes that might get a laugh, so just you're aware of what you're walking into here. When I first wrote the beginning of this speech, it was 2 days after the September 4th, 2024 shooting at Appalachian High School in Georgia. There, a 14-year-old with an AK-47 walked into the ordinary morning of lockers and lesson plans and left behind 4 graves, 9 wounded, and a silence very heavy with grief. Since then, my convictions have only deepened. They have been sharpened by watching empathy continue to thin in public life and by spending my spring semester of 26 in Ireland. There, the law itself seems to speak a different moral language about violence. Sitting in the green Irish countryside, laying in the fields of a nation historically plagued by English colonization and borderline genocide, I reflected on the differences in our countries. Ireland is a country where firearms are tightly restricted under a long framework of firearm acts, where certain weapons from silencers to high-capacity firearms are strictly controlled or prohibited. And then, being there in a place shaped by laws that assumes weapons should be rare and carefully justified, I kept remembering how I felt in my dorm room in New York when Appalachian High School became another victim of gun violence. I remember writing this on that day. I can't imagine being in that community. I can't imagine being the mother of the dead kids. I can't imagine being the mother of the 14-year-old boy that kills his schoolmates and his teachers and then himself. The grief, just the horror of it all. My phone that day was filled with videos of the attack taken by the students, and their hallways looked just like mine. And this was not an isolated nightmare. Since Columbine in 1999, there have been more than 420 school shootings in the United States, and at least 390,000 students have experienced a school shooting in their school year. I kept thinking about my high school. What would I do if it was attacked by a gunman? What would my community do? How would they heal? How would I heal? What if the teachers that watched me grow up died? If my college was attacked, the lives of people I know and love being in jeopardy in English class, my life being in jeopardy in English class, what would I do seeing my friends bleed out on the floor? And to be fair, in that moment, I probably wouldn't be thinking about gun policy. I'd be thinking about the locks on the doors and the desperate muscle memory of active shooter drills. The drills that took place twice a year from ages 5 to 18. The drills that taught me to calculate if someone would be able to shoot me from the window from hiding spot under my desk. And suddenly, in the wake of the moment, and after Appalachian High School in Georgia, while writing the speech, after the spiral of emotion, I found myself completely sobbing. And I found myself wanting to justify my tears. I found myself thinking, I know I'm being dramatic. But then I reflected, why was dramatic the word that popped in my head? Why was the internal reflex to feel ashamed? Realize how absurd that is. Shaming and questioning myself for feeling emotion. I realized it was internal conditioning, and I'll dive into that later. But at the heart of it, I was crying because children were murdered in a place of learning. Mothers with no longer repacking their child's school lunches. We're living in a dramatic and terrifying reality where it's considered pretty normal for a child to open a firearm in his high school. The situation is dramatic, the grief is dramatic, the loss is dramatic, the tears are not the exaggeration, the violence is. And so many times, by so many of our fellow citizens, the reaction gets labeled as weird or performative. We're not born with a stop crying switch in our brains, we're taught it. But Hebrews 3:15 says, "For we are warned, do not harden your hearts." This is a learned behavior, that hardening. We live in a culture that judges deep empathy. If you care too much, society labels you as unstable or too political. And this is a symptom of a deeply sick culture. If we can't grieve the pain and the death of children, our collective wiring is just completely fried. Then our reactionless society doesn't teach us the empathy. In the United States, firearms are now the leading cause of death for children and teenagers, and someone dies from a gun every 11 minutes. The jaded reaction to school shootings is teaching people to not have empathy. And when a bunch of folks believe that empathy is not necessary to their way of being and their moral ideology, the more school shootings happen. And the more school shootings happen, the more apathetic lawmakers become. And no change to gun policy is applied, which then promotes more apathy and more gun violence. Our lifeless reactions fertilize a culture perfectly engineered for more tragedy. And so it continues. Neutrality then becomes active. When we were actively choosing to do nothing and to feel nothing, we are functionally helping the thing happen. There's no neutral ground in a tragedy. And Scripture named this danger plainly. I will remove you from your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. Ezekiel 36:26. Culture that shames empathy is a culture of slowly choosing stone. Kids shouldn't want to kill their classmates in their t-shirts, and they shouldn't have the access to the gun to shoot them with. No community should have to rally over dead bodies in school hallways. No mother should have to identify her child by what they were wearing that morning. But generally in the US, there's a dull, indifferent energy towards this violence, all while a hum of a low-level threat of danger at all times sings. Upon my arrival to Ireland, the sudden removal of the hum of the threat was finally lifted. It was like when the air conditioning finally turns off in a room and you suddenly realize how incredibly loud it had been the whole time. The contrast is not mere rhetoric, it is statistical. Firearm homicide rates are about 22 times higher than the entire European average. I still remember my FCC-UC trip to South Dakota. And there I learned that the Lakota people have a different word for what we would call youth. Their word directly translates to sacred beings. Compare that to the clinical use of words, minors, dependents, students. The contrast has never left me. Because if young people are sacred beings, if children are sacred beings, then their lives are not headlines. They are holy breath. They are entire futures walking around in sneakers and backpacks. Being so used to suffering, whether in classrooms or detention centers or on the streets, that we no longer instinctively react with grief and horror and is dangerous. It should be normal to cry when children suffer anywhere. The test of our humanity is not whether we feel for people who look like us, vote like us, or live near us. The test is whether we feel for anybody at all. Rejoice with those who rejoice, and mourn with those who mourn. Romans 12:15. Mourning is not melodrama, it is moral awareness. And we are failing this command. We are choosing the stone heart. Empathy is a dying sensation in this world, in our world. My instinct to justify my tears, to minimize tragedy so I don't look too emotional, is not natural. It's a symptom of a cultural shift happening in the United States. And I know that for many of you, this byproduct isn't an interpersonal truth. For us, especially in the wake of the Club Q shooting that killed 5 people and injured 25, the Highlands Ranch shooting where 1 died and 8 were injured, the Boulder supermarket shooting that killed 10, and the Aurora Theater shooting that killed 12 and injured 70, we Coloradans remain in panicked memory. But if no change is made, it is my prediction that soon everybody will know someone whose life has been touched by gun violence. Currently, researchers warn that this violence is becoming so widespread that 1 in 15 Americans have witnessed a mass shooting firsthand. I don't want that number to escalate. I don't want to live in a world where change only happens once tragedy is personal, once it's our sister dead, our father, our friend, our mother. God forbid a world where everybody knows a dead kid. A world where every mother fears that knock on the door. The erosion of empathy shows up everywhere, and how easily people dehumanize strangers, how easily compassion is mocked. And once you get really good at detaching from dead high schoolers in your own country, it becomes terrifyingly easy to detach from migrant children in cages. Terrifyingly easy to become xenophobic, racist, homophobic, misogynistic. It's the same mechanism of looking away. It's the not my problem mechanism. Yet we are told to carry each other's burdens in Galatians. If we only care about violence when it happens to us personally, there's no longer a society. They're just isolated individuals sitting around waiting for their turn to be a victim of it. And then it's the people we love, and maybe it's us. History is constantly launching. We love to think that societies are judged historically by their GDP or their technological advancements or their military power. But our book, our Bible, has always measured societies not by how they treat the powerful, but by how they treat the vulnerable. As it is written, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers, sisters, and siblings of mine, you did for me. Matthew 25:40. We need more visible empathy in this world, the kind of empathy that wakes up when a baby cries, the kind mothers know when their child suffers. And it starts with me crying over the school shooting in Georgia and refusing to apologize for it. As poet laureate Andrea Gibson once wrote in a poem, "I know my heart is a broken freezer chest. That's why I can't keep anything frozen. So no, I am not just always crying, I am just thawing outside the lines. And even if I am always crying, it is a fact that salt is the only reason everything floats so good in the Dead Sea." I know that many of you, my beloved community, my home, my compass, feel the same way as I do. And I acknowledge that crying about everything we see can be emotionally dangerous. I talked about it in therapy actually recently. My therapist said something I now keep as a lock screen on my computer, which is, we have to take care of ourselves in order to take care of the world. I don't think this is necessarily a call to action for you all, but it is a wailing, screaming cry of grief from a young person in your community demanding change. But here's what you can do. You can cry over the death of children, of the most vulnerable of this world. You should. It is not dramatic, it is human, and it's necessary. It's actually this community that taught me that. There was a time where I stood just down there on those steps and openly wept in response to my own feelings about the future of this church. When we were talking about electing Leanne, actually, and the necessity of change, someone in this congregation told me to never apologize for my tears, and I've held that close, and it's now a central philosophy for my way of being. Scripture does not praise indifference, it commands compassion. Cultural willingness to feel grief and to feel empathy is the first step towards change. Allowing yourself to cry over these atrocities is inherently a political act. With your tears, you're saying, I actively refuse to accept this as normal. I have not surrendered to the status quo. We are the ones who still have the heart of flesh. We are the ones who see sacred beings instead of statistics on the screen. You all taught me that. By treating me like a sacred being. By allowing me to be an outspoken youth. By way of being FCC UCC. The next time you see a breaking headline, weep. Our words and our tears are all we have left. And in honor of Mother's Day, I have to say this. My mother taught me the weight of our words, our tears, and our actions. The same poem I quoted earlier by Andrea Gibson goes on to say, my mother said, it is totally fine if I blow off steam. As long as I can speak in an octave, my kindness can still reach. My mom taught me how to deliver a message and how to live my heart, live inside my language, and I've had the privilege of watching her bring that same care to this congregation and beyond. She used her words, and now she's here watching me use mine. And I want to live in a world where every mother gets that chance, where no mother is left grieving a child she could still be watching grow, sing, speak, and be heard. For all the mothers who have lost a child, for all the the children who have lost a mother, and for every child and mother in between, a lullaby for you. I will meet you by the river. If I go before you do, I'm not gone, just gone ahead, waiting there for you. And I will meet you by